By thinking ahead and running scenarios through your head transitions you from a clinical decision maker to a tactical decision maker.
This is actually an acrylic model of my skull. The doctors put me back together.
The most dangerous part of being a spy is actually everyday life.
Everyone that's listening has experienced trauma.
You just never know when a good day is going to go bad.
I survived an enemy ambush. Everybody gets ambushed in life.
The real power in life comes from being anonymous.
Are you teachable? Are you coachable?
If you can't take care of yourself or pick up a family member and run with them, then you're already behind.
Will you be ready?
I win or I get better. When you fail miserably, will you get smarter or will you give up?
The more self-reliant you are, the less all the crazy world out there can affect you.
It's a mindset of training and readiness.
Man, you've had a crazy experience, not just seeing some stuff, but I mean, like you literally got hit in the face with it. What, 8 times, I think you got shot. Yep. I haven't even been shot once. What's that like?
It hurts a lot. You know, it's not quite like the movies. Although, you know, the interesting thing, there are different levels of gunshots. So there are gunshots that are called a through and through, meaning it hits muscle and it goes directly through. There's also high velocity, low velocity. I mean, we could get into all of it. So for me, it hurt. I was struck twice. I was struck twice in the elbow. So I don't know if you can see some of the damage. Mm-hmm. Twice in the one arm hit me in the lower bicep, and the other round hit me right on the inside of my forearm, and it just effectively destroyed my elbow. 2 Pecan machine gun rounds, which is a bullet about the size of my thumb. And then I was stitched across the body armor. I was hit in the helmet. I was hit off my weapon, left night vision tube shot. And then, of course, I took a round in the face. So with the arm, what I tell people is, okay, everybody's kind of hit their funny bone. And you get that fun, stinging, tingling, uncomfortable feeling. It was kind of like that, but amplified by like 1,000. It was like a gorilla hit me in the arm with a bat. And then like a lightning bolt traveled up my arm and just struck me in the back of the skull. And then I couldn't feel anything in my arm. A lot of pain, but I just couldn't feel anything. So my initial thought was my arm had been shot off. What I didn't know at the time is my arm probably caught on my gear. So when I reached over and couldn't feel it, I had no feeling in my arm. I was like, holy shit, my arm got shot off. Gunfight continued. Took rounds off body armor, you know, like I said, weapon, nods, side plate. And I turned to get out of that you know, that hail of gunfire, and I caught a round in the face. It caught me right in front of the ear, traveled through my face, exited the right side of my nose. So it took off most of my nose, blew out my right cheekbone, broke it and kicked it out to the right, broke all the bones above my eye, vaporized my orbital floor, broke the head of my jaw, shattered my jaw to my chin, and it knocked me out.
So like out, like you're unconscious.
Unconscious.
Did you even know you'd been shot in the face, or were you unconscious before you were even aware?
No, I don't remember the impact of being shot in the face. And I'll be honest, when I first came to, it wasn't like, holy shit, I got shot in the face. It was more like my brain was in a fog and trying to figure out what happened. Like I knew that it was kind of like the world slowly opened back up. Like, okay, where am I? What's going on?
Did you lose vision on that side?
Yes and no. So my vision was damaged, and the doctors but it was more damage because my orbit was broken and destroyed. My eye dropped into this newfound hole in my face, and my eye muscles were damaged. The eye itself, miraculously, was not damaged. So it became more of a vision alignment problem over the years to try and fix. And to this day, when I'm looking straight, my vision's good. They fix that. Anytime, like if I look up like this, or if I break my field of vision, I get double vision. But so what? I turn my head. But this is actually an acrylic model of my skull. The doctors used to put me back together. So I don't know if you guys.
If you're listening to this on podcast, on any of the podcast platforms, go to YouTube. Yeah. You got to see this. Like this is worth the vision. And it's crazy.
Yeah, it's crazy. I mean, literally, it's like almost as if somebody took an axe and hit me in the face was the amount of damage we sustained, which is really cool to look at, and how blessed I am. Why we created the No Bad Days line. We basically designed the shirts around my skull. The No Bad Days line, people love it. And when I speak, I talk to people about that, about perspective, man. Just be so thankful you're alive. I'm so thankful. I look at that skull and it just gives me so much perspective. When other people are like, oh my God, I had a bad day. I'm like, man, you don't know what a bad day is. You know, what you're misinterpreting as a bad day is really nothing more than a schedule disruption. True bad days need to meet 4 criteria, or at least 2 of the 3. True bad day, in my opinion, is what I call a life ambush. Like I survived an enemy ambush, everybody gets ambushed in life. And this is where we have perspective problems, because so many people use that phrase. I mean, you and I meet people all the time, you know, these negative people are like, oh my God, I had a bad day. And I'm like, oh, wow, what happened, man? And they're like, oh, I wasn't able to get my coffee, or the line in Starbucks was too long, or I had a flat tire. And I'm like, dude, that's not a bad day. That's a schedule disruption. A true bad day is it will leave mental, physical, emotional, or deep financial scars. You never fully recover from those things. You will always look back and say, oh my God, and think with pain over that event. I think of the night I was wounded. When I look back on it, it's still painful to think about. I've been through about 4 major life ambushes. So if it doesn't meet those criteria, it's not really a bad day. That's why I say no bad days. You have hard days, you have tough days. But if you wake up breathing, man, it's a good day. It's up to you to make it a great day.
You know, I have a friend named Brad Lee. A lot of people know who he is. And he said, you probably know who Brad is. And he says something all the time. He's like, you know, people wake up and they say, oh, I got to get up early. I have to go to my work. And he's like, no, you get to wake up early. You get to go to your job. He said, if I gave you $1 million tonight when you were going to sleep and said, hey, congrats, here's $1 million and you don't have to wake up in the morning. Like you're dead. You don't get it. You don't get any more days, but here's that $1 million you've been working so hard for. Like, would you take it? And of course you wouldn't take it. No. Everybody would rather have tomorrow than $1 million. So when tomorrow comes, it can't be a bad day, because you've already defined it as being worth more than $1 million, because you wouldn't have traded it.
There are a lot of different topics, you know, that I speak on. The idea of getting off the X, which the X is any point of attack or adversity or crisis. For us in the military, it was kind of an ambush term or an attack term. But so many people get stuck on the X in their mind. And it just comes down to perspective. It comes down to poor perspective. You know, if you live in America, man, you live in one of the greatest countries in the world. And it drives me insane right now, all the division and right now, I don't know if you know this, but there's a major virus going on. The virus I'm talking about is the victim mindset. We are growing a nation of victims. We are convincing people all across the nation of America that because of your race, creed, color, gender, age, demographic, where you came from, your religion, you know, your gender affiliation, whatever it is, you're a victim. And you can't get ahead unless somebody else helps you. And people are buying into this hook, line, and sinker. And we got to break that mindset. We live in one of the greatest countries in the world, freedom and opportunity. And why this is so untrue is there are millions and millions of super successful Americans who came from all those different demographics who said, you know what, that ain't me. I'm going to break out of this. I might have grown up on the poor streets of Chicago, but guess what? I'm leaving. I'm going someplace else and making a name for myself or launching a business for myself. That's freedom and opportunity. And so many people buy into this victim mindset, and they buy into this negative mindset of, oh my God, I had a bad day because XYZ. And it's just not true. It's a lie.
To your point, we're so wired now to feel like we need the collective to be okay.
Or even you're placed into the victim box. You know, if you are a minority, or if you are a woman, you're discriminated against and you can't get ahead. And don't get me wrong, there is some discrimination out there. There's no doubt about it. There are some assholes out there that blatantly or at least covertly will discriminate. But the problem is there's so many individuals who have broken out of that, who said, you know what? You may tell me that, but that ain't going to apply to me. I refuse to be the victim. I'm going to be a victor. I'm going to drive forward. And there are amazing minorities and women and all across the board in the victim buckets that, society right now and the media wants to place people into that are super successful. They are CEOs. They are multimillionaires. And they came from all the areas that you're trying to tell all these other people, well, if you came from that area, you can't be successful. Well, what about these people? These people that did it, they came from the same area. You know why? Because it comes down to what we talked about, self-leadership, which is everything I speak on. You're waiting for somebody to save you, for the cavalry to come, but 90% of the time, it ain't going to happen. 90% of the time. And even if it did, the level of success that you're going to find from somebody else dragging you up is significantly different from you grinding and climbing and getting to the top on your own. Self-leadership, building those relationships, building a team, having an overcome mindset. That's what does it. And we're losing that. I think America was built on those principles and we're losing that now. We need to bring it back desperately.
Yeah. I love that term you said. I want to make sure I capture it in my mental vault, the moving off the X. Is that what you called it?
Yeah.
The X. So the X is wherever you are, where the bad thing is happening.
That's right. So I survived a vicious enemy ambush. And as a SEAL, I had spent the majority of my adult life looking at how do we contain the enemy into a certain place, whether it was a specific target, whether it was an ambush point, whatever it was. We would go out and we would conduct operations. Frequently in the last 20 years was to capture or kill an individual, usually a bad person on the battlefield. And when we did that, we would lock down an area. And then if it escalated to a certain point, then we would try and pour as much, firepower and explosives and whatever to either totally contain that individual, but overwhelm them to the point that either they were killed or they lost their will to fight. And on September 13, 2007, the day that I was ambushed, I found out what that feels like to be on the receiving end of that. And it sucks. It's so overwhelming, to have that level of firepower rain down on you. And typically when these things happen, whether it's a gunfight or now we get into the life ambush, believe it or not, the way the human body reacts and the mind reacts is the same. So I have a lot of people that hear me say, oh my God, you were all shot up in this gunfight. I can't relate to that. But that's not true, because in a life ambush, no different from an enemy ambush, when you're on the point of attack, the crisis, the adversity, you just got punched in the mouth, whatever level of trauma. And I define life ambushes as we already talked about the criteria, mental, physical, emotional, or deep financial scars. But when they happen, it can be something on the lower end of the spectrum, like the ending of a relationship, divorce, personal failure, personal crisis, personal or professional crisis. It could be a lawsuit. It could be bankruptcy. It could be the failure of your company. It could be life-threatening illness or injury or an accident to you or someone you love. It could be sexual trauma to you or someone you love. It could be the unexpected loss of someone you love, or the higher end of the spectrums, sexual trauma to a child or the loss of a child. These are major life ambushes. And when they happen to us, no different than I felt in that gunfight, everybody else feels the same way. We feel a feeling of no hope. We feel a feeling of there's nothing I can do. We feel a feeling of it's totally outside my control, all these things. And the interesting thing is, if we hooked you, whoever you are out there that's going through a life ambush right now, whatever you're going through, up to medical devices that measured brainwave activity, respirations, all these different things, and you were able to go back and hook me up to it in the middle of my gunfight, they'd actually be very similar. Yeah. Because the human mind doesn't say, oh, I'm being shot at. The human mind says, oh my God, this is an emergency situation, release stress, release, endorphins and all these different things that jack our body up and go into the fight or flight mode. So this is when we're on the X, and this is when we're totally overwhelmed with what's going on around us. But just like in my gunfight, the reason I survived and my team survived is we had been taught one critical principle, that when you are in an ambush, when you're attacked, you have to get off the X as quickly as possible. And thankfully, my teammates did an amazing job. We also had an incredible Air Force AC-130 gunship aircraft up overhead that brought in a fire mission that enabled us to get off the X. But you have to do the same things in your own life. You have to have a mindset of, hey, man, no matter how great you live your life, bad things happen to good people. And at some point, all of us in this life get on the X. I tell people, the average person in Overcome is where I talk a lot about these principles. And we estimated that the average person will go through a minimum of five major life ambushes, not even like minor ones. I'm talking majors, like, being shot to shit in a gunfight, and fighting for your life. That's a major life ambush. Another one of my major life ambushes was I had a big leadership failure that almost got me kicked out of the SEAL teams, and earning back the credibility and respect of my teammates, hardest road I've ever walked. Major life ambush. These things take time, but this is the essence of the Overcome mindset. It is a mindset of, I don't know what the future holds for me, but no matter what, when these moments come, I'm going to get off the X as quickly as possible. Understanding that timeline is a little relative. If you lose a child, I don't expect you the next day to come skipping outside and being like, hey, man, I lost my child yesterday, but I'm so ready to take on the world. Timeline's relative, but you know that no matter what, you can't just lay on the X. And there are a lot of people out there that do it. They lay on the X and they focus on what they lost. They focus on where they should be, or they focus on someone or something to blame, and they just lay there. And the X is like quicksand. The longer you sit on it, the more it pulls you down and the harder it is to get up and go. So I teach something called the REACT methodology. It's a system to go through to get off that X.
Okay. But can you talk about that? I will tell you, my audience, we love tactical, almost nerdy, ways to be better at life. So please share if you want.
The REACT methodology is a big one that a lot of people use. But I want to say one point. Oftentimes when something really bad like that happens, you're absolutely right. You're absolutely right, Jeff, that it almost becomes an excuse for people to sit on the X, especially something as devastating as the loss of a child. People, well, of course I'm falling apart. I lost a child, but it becomes an excuse. And almost to the point that I've watched people, I've seen this in the wounded warrior community that have endured really bad trauma on the battlefield, whether it was with themselves or the loss of a friend. And that incident becomes an excuse for every bad behavior there is. And they spiral down and become a lesser version of the person they once were. And everything is justified because of that life ambush that happened, whether it's the loss of a child or the loss of a friend or whatever it is. So self-medication, alcoholism, risky sexual behaviors, affairs, whatever it is, all of it is, I'm doing this because of what happened. It's because of this. And to me, that's not leading yourself. You're using that as an excuse. And anyone you've lost or anything that's happened, especially, if we use the case of a teammate or a friend that's lost or a child that's lost, do you honestly think that they would be happy to know that you spiral down into a lesser version of yourself? How in that way are you honoring who they were or their memory? I think about my teammates and I'm like, every day I should be driving out there trying to be great so I can honor them because they're not here to do it. They give anything to have one more day on this earth. So I should be getting out of bed and hitting the day running and helping to make other people better. So when a life ambush happens, what is the REACT methodology? So REACT is an acronym. The first one, when you get punched in the face with whatever adversity it is, the R stands for you've got to recognize your reality. And that's probably the hardest thing. As humans, we just have a natural tendency that when bad things start to develop, we don't want to admit they're happening. Because once we admit they're happening, then we have to deal with the reality of, oh my God, like my life is about to go off course. Like it's like it's like the accident is happening, and or you're watching a train wreck unfold, and it's like no, but you don't want to admit it. So it's human nature that we procrastinate, we deny, we ostrich, we stick our head in the sand, and we're like, oh well, maybe if I just hide, this will go away. 95% of the time, it never does. So recognizing our reality is the biggest thing and the thing that we need to do the fastest. Number 2 is evaluating your assets. What are the tools that you have in your toolbox? And those moments where there's no hope, it's out of my control, there's nothing I can do, those are lies. And the reality is when we start to realize there are tools in our toolbox, I mean, take my gunfight as an example. Even though I was all shot up, I had been around long enough, and as a leader, I knew, okay, what are the assets I have in this situation? I knew I had my teammates back at the house, our separate group about 150 yards away. I had a Marine Corps quick reaction force on standby about 2 kilometers away. We had helicopters overhead. I had a special operations aviation medevac helicopter. I had an Air Force AC-130 gunship. These were the tools that I had to bring to bear on this problem. Life's no different. If you suddenly get diagnosed with cancer, okay, who are the doctors that I know? I need oncologists. I need my family support system. I need these are my tools to deal with this problem. So number 3 is assess possible options and outcomes. So once we know what tools we have, now we begin to look at, okay, what's the right tool to use? And oftentimes people make the mistake of grabbing the first tool and being like, oh my God, I'm in a crisis. Let me use this tool. Frequently, it may not be the right tool. So this is where we need to take a pause. And in the military, we call this, we need to let the battlefield develop. This is where we bring our teammates in, our friends in, if it's a business crisis, our business partners, our business associates, our subject matter experts, and we look at everything that's going on and we make sure, okay, we have a good grasp of what this emergency is. Now let's start to look at option A. What's that outcome? Let's play this out. If we take this path, what does it truly look like? And frequently understanding that sometimes that short-term pain, the harder path is actually the better path, even though typically in a crisis, it's not the one we want to take. Number 4, the C in react is choose a direction and communicate it. So as a leader, we've gone through this process. We've identified the different options. And we, as a team, typically we say, hey, this is the best, worst decision. And that's hard often for leaders. So what'll happen, you'll walk away from that and we'll start doing what a lot of people do. We ruminate over it. Oh my God, we thought B was good, but geez, I don't know. I'm going to have to cut this division, or it's going to cost me so much money, or whatever it is. Doesn't matter. Choose that direction, communicate it. It accomplishes 3 things. Number 1, the second it gets out of your head, it's no longer an idea. It becomes action off your lips. You as leaders, typically once we say something, we follow it, we execute it because we put it out there. Number 2, you're never on the X alone. Your team members, your family, your friends get pulled onto the X with you when there's a major crisis. So when you tell others, this is what we're going to do, that generates, number 3, hope. That generates hope. You're saying, hey, we're in a crisis, but guess what? This is what we're going to do. Yes. All right. We've got a plan. And then the 5th one, and Jeff, you kind of mentioned this earlier, T is take action, execute. So many people, this is a stall point because people are waiting for the perfect moment. In a crisis, they've come up with a plan and then suddenly they're like, oh, so a gunfight being a perfect example, a lot of people are waiting for the bullets to stop flying. A really well-trained force knows how to shoot. So T is take action, execute. Movement is life. Movement creates momentum, like you were talking about earlier. And that's what enables you to get off that X. And if you go from one X to the next, guess what? React again and overcome and get off the X.
Before I ask, how does one become a CIA spy? How does one become a person that could become a CIA spy, right? Like walk me back to the beginning. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's actually the better of all the questions that we could have started with. So let me kind of kick off by saying that what Hollywood does to portray CIA officers is completely wrong. And then I'm sure that surprises everyone exactly 0%. But just like when you watch a show about ER surgeons, everything's wrong. When you watch a show about how police carry out their job, everything's wrong, right? There's an element of creative license that has to be used to turn it into entertainment. Entertainment and education could not be more different, right? And what I'm all about is spy education. So the real facts about how CIA officers work are far more pragmatic and practical than anything you've ever seen in a Hollywood movie. I often tell people that I think Hollywood gets it wrong because they miss the best parts of being a CIA officer. The best parts about being an undercover intelligence operative is that nobody knows you're an intelligence operative. You literally control the world around you. Nobody even notices you. You can get in, execute your secret mission, and get out, and nobody even knows you were there. That is so much more pragmatic and useful than any of the stuff that you see happen on stage or screen when it comes to spies and spy novels and spy media. So really, to answer your question in as short a way as possible, the way that you start your journey to becoming an intelligence officer is you start with a ruthless focus on practical, pragmatic decision-making. And for me, as a kid, that was kind of forced upon me. My father died before I was born. I was raised by a single mom who was, the first generation of American citizens who got to the United States illegally. And she didn't have a college education. Like, I was born in very practical situations. My mom had to figure out how to be a single mom, raising a child, in a different culture. And that was where I grew up. So I was feeding myself breakfast and watching Saturday morning cartoons, dressing myself for public school by the time I was 6 years old. And that's where the roots were kind of laid. There are essentially 5 places on the human body where you can stab somebody with a pedestrian pen and they will die within 30 seconds to 2 minutes, right? So, and we are trained in what those 5 spots are. And we are trained on how to use them. We're even trained on how to identify the right kind of pen to use, right? Whether you use something like a Bic pen that you can buy at a set of 25, that is a different kind of plastic, a different kind of tensile strength than a tactical pen or a steel pen or a metal pen that you might buy from a retail outlet, in the survival space or tactical space. Regardless, when you're choosing an instrument that you might use to do someone harm, you always have to consider how that instrument might be traced back to you, whether that's through fingerprints or whether that's through some kind of sales code or some sort of registration ID, right? Because if you're going to be undercover, the perfect instrument to defend yourself with is an instrument where you use it for some sort of activity that could be considered criminal, and then you dispose of that item and it can't be traced back to you. So, Bic pen number 25 in the box of 50 is the perfect kind of tool, where registration number 24612, tactical pen that was purchased in this specific shop in this specific city on this specific date, is less ideal. But here's the practical piece of it. Why the hell would you teach someone how to kill another person with a pen without first teaching them everything else about how to avoid the situation where they might have to kill somebody with a pen? And that's what people don't understand, and that's what media gets wrong. Liam Neeson has a very specific set of skills in the movie Taken. Yes, it's a fantastic line. It's super entertaining. But what's even more interesting and even more valuable is that he has dozens of other less specific skills that he was trained to use so that he never had to turn to that last set of specific skills. So we learn how to hurt people. We learn how to steal. We learn how to break in and break out of locations. We learn all of those skills only after we first learn how to master the skills that make it so we shouldn't ever have to use those final sets of skills, right? Those are all the just-in-case skills. If you're really good at what you do, if you're a really good covert undercover operative, you will never have to pull a gun. You will never have to hurt a person. You will never have to steal by breaking and entering, because you will have been so skilled in the other techniques that the people literally open their doors to you. They give you the thing that you want. They forget that you're even there. That's how you really master the practical set of espionage skills.
Yeah, most people, it's not terribly useful to know how to kill a person with a Bic pen, but it's incredibly useful to know how to navigate relationships and maintain calm and be emotionally regulated and be a good negotiator and control other people's perception. And I mean, that's the concept of everyday spy, is that like spy skills are great for everyday people too, right?
Exactly right. And Here's why. Because the most dangerous part of being a spy is actually everyday life. Because there's things that you don't even think about, right, Jeff? When you go out and you live a standard 24-hour day, there's over 100 instances where you don't even realize you are using your identity and you are leaving a breadcrumb trail behind you that is traceable, trackable, and potentially could be leveraged for harm of you, your family, or your business, right? Every time you pull out your credit card, every time you step into your own vehicle that has a license plate on the backside of that vehicle, every time you use your cell phone, every time you type in a location to GPS, every time you accept cookies on a website, there's a dozen things that you're doing without even thinking about it, right? When you click yes to allow an app to access your contact list, these are all touch points that identify Jeff Lerner, what we call the real person, right? Your true identifiable information. They connect you with a larger organization or a larger group, a larger organism that can potentially be reverse engineered to do you harm. When you are an undercover operative, the identity that you adopt is not your real identity. So now when your alias identity plugs into that larger organism, it is very traceable. It's very trackable back to what you claim to be versus what you actually are. So if Jeff Lerner is an alias as Jacob Trust, and Jacob Trust calls somebody who's on Jeff Lerner's contact list, you've just connected Jeff with Jacob. And now all of a sudden, both Jeff and Jacob are at risk of being identified for being the same person. So all those daily activities, from using your credit card to signing a receipt to, turning when somebody calls out the name Jeff or Jacob in the hallway, all of those little everyday activities become very dangerous for an actual professional covert intelligence operative. So the thing that we're trained the most to control and anticipate are the challenges of everyday life. How to maintain control in a relationship so that somebody doesn't take control of you through a relationship, whether that's a sales relationship, a personal relationship, whether that's a professional relationship, because one of the ways that you can be compromised, whether it's compromising secrets, compromising information, or simply sacrificing your own energy, time, and money, one of the fastest ways you can become compromised is through a relationship of some sort, whether it's a relationship because somebody else is picking your kids up from school and you trust them to pick up your kids, or whether it's a relationship because, you're paying somebody X number of dollars and you signed a contract. Every time you engage with another human being, you run a risk of being compromised. And that's the bigger risk to us than, let's say, kidnapping or, some sort of hostile entry into your home. Those things could happen, but the probability is much lower than the probability of another human being trying to compromise you through some sort of relationship or some sort of compromising conversation.
Based on what you just said, it seems like the number one skill of a spy is to be underestimatable.
Yes.
They don't see you coming. That is not a uniquely valuable skill to spies. That's like the number one way to have your way in life is you stay in command by getting resources to ignore you until it's your time of your choosing.
But here's what's funny about that, Jeff. You can say that rationally right now, but that's not the way people live. People don't live by that truth because culturally we've been conditioned to believe that we have to demand attention at all times. Yeah. We have to be noteworthy. We have to be interesting. We have to be front and center, right? And you've got all these sayings that back it up, right? The greasy wheel is the one that gets the squeaky wheel gets the grease, right? Like you've got all these ideas that are permeating through our culture that tell us you have to constantly be noteworthy and relevant or else you are irrelevant. It's what we believe is the absolute antithesis of what is accurate and true, but it's also the antithesis of what we will land on using our own logical, rational thought process. Because you and I both get it, and everybody listening gets it too. Somehow they simultaneously understand that the real power in life comes from being anonymous. But we're doing everything in our power to not be anonymous day to day. We're trying to get our boss's attention. We're trying to post our life on social media. We're trying to get likes and friend requests and thumbs ups. We want to make other people happy. We're doing the opposite of what we already know we should be doing. A big part of what spies are trained to do is simply understand the rational, logical side of how human beings think, and then use the fact that they don't abuse or manipulate the fact that human beings don't use their rational brain. They use their emotional brain to make decisions that they then later rationalize.
I listened to your interview with Lex Fridman, and I liked when you guys got into talking about the difference between you were talking about method acting, spy, we'll call it spy acting or spy non-acting, as the case may be. There's like a different way to kind of get there. And then he was talking about authenticity and kind of the unified, integrated life that isn't, factionalized in different personas and whatnot. So I'm curious, because I think I can totally, it's very obvious and intuitive how these skills of like emotional regulation, staying in the logical place of the brain and not downgrading into the cerebellum and, thinking like most people do. And certainly social intelligence, managing relationships, maintaining control through communication, conversational technique, like all of that, it's extremely obvious how that would benefit a person in life. The difference, and I'm curious how you sort of reconcile this or how you navigate this now, is that you guys, or in your old life, you were using all that to create a false reality. In call it real life, there's like probably this, at some level, almost an elevated level of art, which is to use all that, not to create a false reality, but to create almost like an intensified real reality, like a real reality in which you have more control than the average person inhabiting a real reality. So I'm curious, connect those dots for me.
Yeah, absolutely. And I appreciate what you're getting at here. So what you were talking about previously when it comes to, integrated thinking and the conversation I was having with Lex, when it comes to how most people kind of try to create an authentic life versus what a spy does when we try to create a compartmentalized life. That's the word we use. We compartmentalize different elements of our operations, different elements of our alias personas, as well as our genuine real personas. We compartmentalize them so that we can essentially control and insulate one from being a danger or a distraction from the other. Whereas what the average person tries to do is they try to find a way to integrate everything together. And in that process of integrating everything together, what ends up happening for a lot of people is we become overwhelmed. We become emotionally compromised, and we become overwhelmed because we're trying to do everything instead of trying to do just one or two things. So what we've turned into, or what I have done in my efforts to try to share the skills that CIA gave me and to communicate them and translate them into everyday practical tangible methodologies, is I've had to share how we compartmentalize and why we compartmentalize, but I've also had to explain the psychological and cognitive benefits of doing such. And, just like any teacher will tell you, when you teach other people how to do what you know, you start to learn it better and you start to see different ways to connect it and you start to understand it and exercise it and practice it at a higher level. So I've really gained a ton of value for myself in trying to find the way to explain, teach, and justify these practices to others. And one of the ways that we've learned to do it ourselves is, we have to be very transparent. I have to be very transparent. My wife has to be very transparent. My wife is much more uncomfortable with the level of transparency that we have to share with the world in order to communicate our mission and achieve our goals. And our goals being to execute on our mission of breaking barriers with spy skills and spy education for everyday people. So the way that we've kind of learned to adapt our compartmentalization model is that most 95% of what we do about 72 hours delayed. So people who intend to do us harm, and there are plenty of people out there who want to do everyone harm. They want to tear down your success. They want to question your authority. They want to do physical harm, whatever else it might be. We generally try to stay 72 hours behind whatever it is that we are publishing. So if you see me on social media, the picture that you see me in is 72 hours old, right? When I do interviews like this with you, this podcast is not airing today. By the time this podcast airs, this will not be the room that I'm in. And this nondescript room as it is a room that is going to be very difficult for people to understand and to identify anyways. So that's one of the ways that we try to insulate to keep ourselves physically safe, but we do the same kind of thing to keep our intellectual property safe. So we try to make sure that we are always publishing new content, publishing new ideas, publishing new ways and new courses, new books, new, media assets or media rights. We're always trying to do that in a way where we have a head start over the competition so that we're insulated by time. Time, distance, and what's known as change in direction. These are three different ideas that are repeated. They're foundational within espionage and tradecraft. Changing direction means people think you're going left, but then you're actually turned right before they realize it. Time means that the more time you have under your control, the more advantage you have over your opponents. And distance means that the farther the distance that you cover in a period of time, the more difficult it is for your adversary to be able to catch up and find you, especially if you're also changing direction. So we just taken these three concepts, these time, distance, and change in direction, and we've applied them to our physical life to protect our family, and we've applied them to our business and our IP to protect what we're building professionally and in our career.
How could we use what spies learn to do to become someone else? How could we use to become the best of what we truly are? So we sort of reconcile that tension that Lex was pointing out.
So there's two ways that immediately jump to mind, and I really like this concept that you have of essentially creating a target persona. That's how I would translate what you're talking about, right? So another thing that media gets wrong, when spies don an alias, the alias is really only between 5 and 10% different than who you really are. It's a small change, and there's all sorts of tradecraft reasons why we only make a small change, but the bottom line is you're not transforming yourself 80%. You're not becoming a completely different person. You're not turning 180 degrees and going in the opposite direction of who you really are. You're really only changing about 7, 8, 10% of what your true life persona actually is. So if I myself am a middle manager at CIA with 12 years of experience and 2 college degrees, then when I don an alias, guess what I'm probably going to be? A mid-level manager with 2 degrees who's have 12 years of experience on the job. I just might change the name of the job. I might go from being Andrew Bustamante to being, Antonio Joseph, something like that, right? I'm going to keep at least one of my initials so that, whenever I write my initial, whenever I have to write my signature, even if I make a mistake and I start citing my true name, I can quickly correct that mistake. You're always building in a room for what we call predictable error. There's always going to be predictable error. So what you want to do is build your operation to make space for predictable error. So when I hear you talk about coaching and driving and guiding and teaching people to step into a persona, the first thing I would say is if they think they have to change most of who they are, think again, because professionally, what the most elite operatives in the world do is we only change 10%. Right? At most. And the less that you can change, the better off you are, because it gives you all the advantages of who you are and all of your real experience, your real knowledge, your real network, your real memories. You can call upon all of those when you keep things close to true. When you change everything, all of a sudden you have to ignore your memories, ignore your experience, because it doesn't make any sense for someone who's been a painter in Italy for the last 25 years. It makes no sense when that person starts telling a story about how they were in New York for New Year's Eve 2 years ago. They have to find a way to explain why they were in New York, but they haven't been out of Italy for the last 25 years. So, stepping into that persona means knowing that, taking the majority of who you are with you and using it to your advantage. The second thing that we do in intelligence is we always recognize that if you're focused on where you're going, you're only focused on half of what you need to know. Consider a person who's trying to navigate through the forest, right? They have a compass and they know where they are because of the compass. They know what direction they're going. They know where they want to go, but there's still a third piece that they need in order to achieve their true destination. they have to also know where they started. Because to get where you're going, you have to know where you started from, and you have to know where you currently are. If any of those three pieces are missing, the chances of you getting lost are much, much higher, right? If anybody's been a Boy Scout, or if anybody's been, in a position where they've had to use land navigation, when you're literally just using a compass and a destination, that's called dead reckoning. And dead reckoning is prone to massive errors and huge, losses of time and energy and effort, because you're kind of going in like a fishtail towards your direction. Whereas when you know your start point and you know your end point and you know where you are, you have a straight line. It's the most efficient way of getting to where you're going. So one of the things that we constantly do in espionage is we refer back to where we started as children, where we started as students, where we started in our intelligence profession. And we always measure our success against where we started. Don't measure your success against where you're going, because guess what? Where you're going changes. It changes with technology, it changes with age, it changes with life experience, and especially in intelligence operations, when policymakers dictate what your intelligence priorities are. You might spend 2 years chasing an Iranian nuclear scientist, only to find out that now the United States isn't interested in that. They're interested in some new terrorist group that's causing, that's wreaking havoc in Iraq. And now you have to change. So if you're measuring your success against what you've been pursuing for the last 2 years, you will feel like a failure. What you need to do is measure your success against where you started from before you can actually see your progress. Very similar to being on a race course. If you're racing a marathon, if you're racing a 3-mile turkey trot, if you only measure where you are against the finish line, you're always going to be depressed. But if you measure where you are against where you started, you see real gains and real accomplishment.
Can you just tell a little bit of your story, like how you got into this guy that teaches people how to do cool shit role that you're in now?
Yeah, I think, some of it's anchored to different places in my history. I grew up overseas from second grade all the way to high school in Saudi Arabia. And when you're in a closed country like that, and it being at the time, one of the most, extreme Islamic states, with not a whole lot to do, you end up being really good at causing trouble. And so getting good at causing trouble is one in learning how to cause trouble successfully is one aspect of 100 Deadly Skills. The other aspect is then, of course, Boy Scouts. Back in the day, Boy Scouts was cool. And especially when I was doing it overseas, you were actually doing all these kind of awesome adventures that had self-reliance built into it, which is another part of the 100 Deadly Skill book series. And then the third piece is, a military career in the SEAL teams, where, I had the opportunity to do, tactical level stuff, combat, and then also national level clandestine stuff. And so I really pulled from those three parts of my life to create the current 300 Deadly Skill books that are out there and available, with the ultimate goal to make people a little more self-rescue, self-reliant orientated. And but the skills themselves, yes, some of them are pushing the limits and a little taboo. But I felt like, part of self-reliance is it has a little twist of into the world, doomsday type stuff, where am I telling people to go steal a plane just to have fun? Yeah, no. But, it's interesting to, I think, a lot of guys just having that moment to go, okay, well, how would I do that? If I had to commandeer aircraft and get myself out of, a Red Dawn situation like Ukraine, right? Where all of a sudden it's, Russian troops are cruising through your residential area, and maybe the only way to get out is stealing a plane because you live next to a very small local airport, then hell, why not know the skill, right? You just never know when a good day is going to go bad.
Like, what do you think are the real threats that a guy like me needs to be worried about? You hear power grid, you hear cyber hacking, you hear EMP, you hear water contamination, dirty bomb. Like what the hell am I really needing to be worried about, do you think?
Well, I think first, every single geographical point on the map has its own set of different threats, and so I always tell people you've got you've got the alligators in the boat, you've got the alligators right outside the boat, and then you've got the alligators that are inbound, right? And you got to deal with those threats in kind of that order. Like, all right, what's closest to me first? So, yes, is there all of this global chaos going on that's kind of makes you go, is the U.S. gonna receive some kind of blowback from Russia? And it makes you kind of wonder, I hope not. But like I always say, hope really isn't a plan. So you've actually got to start thinking about it and putting some things in place. So like my books, everything starts with human performance, right? So level of fitness for you and your family needs to be at as high as possible, right? If you can't take care of yourself or pick up a friend or pick up a family member and run with them, then you're already behind. So that's the first thing, and being very mobile is obviously key. Your feet become very important, and even more important are your shoes, right? So, the little things matter, whether it's natural disaster, man-made or whatever. Once there's broken glass on the ground and you don't have your shoes next to your bed, but yet you got to get up and run, then, you're just not really going to get very far. You know what I'm saying? So I even say that in all this, you bring up the travel side, safety travel, shoes by the bed where you can put them on and go. And it follows a little bit of the military mindset, where your boots are always either on your feet, and if not, they're unlaced, ready to throw on very quickly and get yourself out of crisis. So that's very small with the question you asked, but it applies to so many things when you talk about, trouble coming your way. So fitness. Readiness mindset, which really is thinking ahead. And like you mentioned early on, like running scenarios through your mind. What most people don't know is by just running scenarios on a regular basis, it doesn't make you paranoid or a prepper or any of those what are sometimes considered bad words. It's really just forethought, right? You're thinking ahead. It's no different than writing a list of all the things I have to do today. But what you're going to do is include I need to think about it when I'm sitting in this restaurant or a movie theater, when I'm driving down the road, my seatbelt's on, I got more than a half a tank of gas, I'm good to go. But you're thinking through things. And you can add to that very simply is, okay, what if my neighborhood what if the sky did fill up with red parachutes, and they're dropping in on us but here's the key. By thinking ahead and running scenarios through your head, transitions you from a clinical decision maker to a tactical decision maker. And the difference being is time and stress. Clinically, if we make clinical decisions, we have plenty of time, zero stress, right? So, but when you start running scenarios through your mind, you're kind of switching yourself over to the tactical decision maker because you're running scenarios where you have zero time and a whole lot of stress. And by doing so, you're coming up with these courses of action that you would take, right? Shooter comes through the door. What do I do? Well, I'm looking for my outs. I'm looking for things I can use as a barricade. I'm looking for improvised weapons. By just simply identifying all these things ahead of time, you've already made decisions so that when something bad happens, all you have to do is act them out, because you won't have time to sit there and think about it at that moment in time. So, your level of fitness, a prepared mindset, those are probably your two biggest pieces of the things you can do right now, regardless of the threat, the crisis, the news, whatever's going on. Start doing those two things and you will be 100% far better if something bad does happen. I think it's the easiest way to relate to people, and that is be self-reliant. And the reason why is the less impact global events will have on you, right? If the more self-reliant you are, the less all the crazy world out there can affect you. And that is probably the simplest, most reasonable reason why everyone should start living a little bit of the rugged life. Because as you mentioned, 1883, it was a very short period ago, right? We are 200-year plus country, but less than 200 years ago, every single man, woman, and child in this country were self-reliant. They all knew how to do whatever it took to survive. And I'm not talking, bad guys and natural disasters and everything we talk about these days. I'm talking just day-to-day survival, right? Every little thing you did each day meant something to you and your family, right? And that has been lost. And so I'm not telling people, hey, go out, buy a cabin in the woods and start farming your own stuff. What I am saying is leverage the modern world and start then using it to then be more self-reliant, and do a little project here and there will go a long ways to then gaining somewhat the confidence in yourself so that you're not relying on that outside world as much. There is so much that you can get ahead of just in thought alone. And of course, planning, and to prevent almost most of the things we worry about. That's the interesting part of it. Anyone who's actually thinking about it and active and staying ahead of whatever that potential bump in the road is, they usually don't really face all those bumps. That's the reality of it. It's the ones that aren't thinking about it that get caught off guard. Because if you are thinking about it, then you're coming up with the tasks and all of the things you need to do each day to prevent it. And so therefore you're not probably going to face it. Those that are I used to compare any soldier, it's crazy to say, but the pinnacle of their whole career is war, right? But it is the rest of the world that is always trying to prevent that one thing. It's very rare, a soldier having that opportunity to put his training to use. But the same thing applies. It's imagine, I train and never actually had a chance to go do it. But I'm very capable of it. And that's how you should be with everything you do is train. You're always training for it, whatever it is in your life. You're determining vulnerabilities. You're taking the outcome and lessons learned. You're rotating them back into your training or whatever it is you're doing to increase performance, safety, whatever it is you got going on, in the hopes that you never face whatever it is that you're training for, unless, of course, you're a soldier.
Well, that's a really astute sort of extrapolation from this whole conversation.
Yeah.
That the way you prevent bad things is to train and prepare for bad things.
Yeah.
Your readiness becomes the prophylactic, basically.
Yeah.
Business owner to business owner. What have you found to be any unexpected challenges or curveballs that you've had to deal with going into, call it, self-employed civilian life, and that you've actually used some of your military training to contend with?
Yeah, there's been a bunch. Coming out of the military is a transition. It still continues for every guy. It doesn't stop. It probably takes the same amount of time you were in is probably how long it takes to transition. And maybe even longer. I don't know, but
interesting.
I'm still transitioning each day, and usually it's anchored to what you just asked, all these issues, right? There's a lot I don't know about business. So I think number one, the military taught me to be really humble, right? And I'm always pushing it, is that new guy mentality, and that is show up early, stay late, volunteer for everything, and keep your fucking mouth shut and your ears open. And that goes a really long ways, no matter what you're doing in life. And so I try to apply that as much as I can to myself and remind myself of that each day, so that I continue to learn and never think that I know everything, because I sure as hell don't when it comes to business. And so that's talking to friends, researching what I can, and so that has helped kind of transition. The other piece that I've learned getting out and what is really good in the military is our ability to be flexible and pivot at a moment's notice, right? You could be training. I remember we rehearsed over and over and over again to take down the largest gas oil platform in the world. And that's located, it's called Maybot, and it's in the Persian Gulf. And at the kickoff of Iraq, our job as SEALs was to secure that thing before the invasion. And the way we trained for it was actually diving in, right, underwater, getting to it, and then coming up from the surface underneath this gas oil platform, hook with these cool hooks and ladders and get on board without them, the Iraqis ever knowing. And literally trained weeks, over and over and over again. And then at the very last minute, they said, never mind, you're just going to take the jet boats all the way up to this thing and just go up the stairs, right? Switch the plan completely. And all you can say is, yes, sir, no problem. We got it. And so, that kind of flexible and the capability to pivot is important. I think those are just some of the top things I've certainly learned, and I've taken a little bit of that military piece and applied to business. And obviously there's a lot more in it. And like I said, it's daily.
I'm curious, are you comfortable sharing about your time in the service?
Yeah.
I mean, I'm not going to ask you names and dates and locations and stuff, but I mean, is there an example you can give? I want to go back to something you said about the difference between clinical thinking and tactical thinking. I know from being an entrepreneur now for 26 years, I'm 42 and I started when I was 16, that I've kind of built that tactical muscle in business, right? I've had one job when I was 16 years old. And since then I've never had a job. I've always had to figure out how to keep a roof over my head and food on the table without conventional employment, right? And I've found myself in a number of situations where I had to think really fast, and I had to make what seemed like a fairly big bet on my belief about what was going to happen, where if I was right, I would look smart, and if I was wrong, I would crash and burn spectacularly. Yeah. And so I'm curious though, if you have any examples from your time in the military, or not, frankly, when literally maybe even the ability to rapidly take action, because this is something I am trying so hard to instill in the audience, is that ability. People hem and haw, they lose so much time around wanting to make sure they make the right decision, when the reality is the best decision makers, and this is Harvard Business Review, not just me, the CEOs of Fortune 500 companies, best decision makers in the world, typically only need about 60% of the relevant information to make a decision. And most of the rightness of that decision has to do with how they take action on the basis of the decision, not what they did to make sure it was the right decision in the first place. And so I'm wondering if you, to kind of sum all of what I just set up, have any examples of how the ability to make quick, decisive decisions and take committed action on the basis of those decisions with perhaps even a limited amount of information might have figuratively or even literally saved your life? Yeah, that's a great question. And I think I have a good example. During the Arab Spring, where the whole globe of Islam basically, was literally lighting fires on every inch of the soil that they were standing on, I happened to be deployed. And I was by myself. I just left the embassy. I'd been given my local phone, which had 0 minutes on the SIM cards they gave me. It hadn't even been plugged in or charged yet, right? Because they're like, here you go. Just make sure you get some SIM cards and make sure you plug it in, charge it, and check in with us. They had given me my embassy badge, which you wear around your neck. And they'd also, for what I was doing, my pistol, right, had been put in country, and I had gotten that. And so after checking in, getting my things and getting a vehicle, I started driving to where I was going to be staying, my lodging. And I took a left, took a right. And then all of a sudden, before you know it, I was surrounded by 1,000 angry people, right? Emotionally charged, very violent crowd. And my vehicle was 100% surrounded. And it was 20, 30, 50, 30 people thick. Yeah. All the way around this thing. And were you by yourself? I was by myself, and they look inside, they see me, the Westerner. Yeah. And now all of a sudden my vehicle is getting rocked back and forth. Driver's side tires are coming off the ground. Passenger side tires are coming off the ground. Driver's side, passenger side. In that moment in time, like, holy crap, I'd already been in a lot of, other risky situations in combat. I've been ambushed, and this was just different, right? This is a whole bunch of angry humans and then me. And
there's not a whole lot you can do. I thought to myself, I could floor it, run over the first 5 people. Then my vehicle get high axled off the ground. My wheels would just be spinning, just like something out of, The Walking Dead, right? Run over zombies enough, you're going to just, your wheels will become ineffective. So I was like, I could do that. That's probably not going to work. I could maybe if I show my embassy badge. Nope. That was a very quick no. Don't do that because then they'll know you're just an American. So they could be looking at me. I could be French. I could be Canadian. I could be Swiss. Right now they don't know really who I am, what I am. I could pull out my pistol. Maybe that'll scare a couple, right? But that'd get me about maybe that wouldn't even get me as far as running over people, right? So one thing I was left was just pay attention to what's around you. I'm looking at these people's faces, and off over the right side of my hood, I see what I would call sympathetic eyes. And it happened to be a uniformed guy with an AK-47 slung over his shoulder. And I look at him, I'm like, I think he actually is worried about me. And so I gave him that universal symbol for money. Right? Moving my fingers back and forth across my thumb. And he kind of looked at me and gave me the, yeah, sure. Why not? We're sitting here communicating, right? We don't speak each other's language. We're not even hearing each other. It's through a windshield with chaos, and my car is going back and forth, right? And I said, okay. And I kind of like, I make the motion of holding a rifle with 2 hands. I'm like, hey, come over to my passenger side window, point that at everybody, and then get in. Come on in. I'll give you money, right? Mm-hmm. So he goes over to the passenger side. He pushes a couple of the first people away, takes his rifle, points it at everybody that's on that passenger side, creates a big, air bubble because they all start pushing and running the other direction.
Right.
And that's enough of a gap so he can get in the car. Right. So I'm asking a armed person to get in the vehicle with me. He gets in and I'm like, lock the door. And he locks the door. Then I'm like, okay, now point that gun out the windshield. So then he points his gun at the windshield and kind of starts moving it back and forth, in a very aggressive manner, like he's going to pull the trigger. And then that creates enough space in the front of the car so that I can get some momentum going. Right.
Yeah.
And he just keeps doing that, pointing the gun. And I just keep on cranking up the speed. People start getting out of the way. We get out of there. We take a left. We go 2 blocks. We take a right. We go a couple more blocks. There's a gas station. We stop. I take a breath. He takes a breath. I look at him. The wad of cash that the embassy gave me, I was like, you can have all of it. Right? Yeah. I give him the cash. Capitalism does exist across the planet. There's no doubt about it. And he says, shukran. I say, afwan. I say, shukran in a more emotional way. And he comes back with afwan, and he gets out of the vehicle, closes the door. And I remember thinking to myself as I rolled down the window for a moment, like 2 blocks ago squared was like life and death. And where I was sitting right there, I could hear the birds chirping. I could see people doing their own little business, going about their business, and thinking to myself, it's just amazing. You can take a wrong turn in life and you could be fucked, but there's always a way out. If you just pay attention, look around, and it helps to kind of be thinking about this stuff, right? Lessons learned, obviously, is, those rights and lefts, you can't control what's around the corner, but you can just control what you got going on. And then hopefully a process of elimination with decision-making, get yourself in a better place in a timely manner. So I think that applies to what you were asking at least a little bit.
Hey there, it's Jeff. So real quick, I want to let you know about my text message community. I use text messages to provide unique value to the Unlock Your Potential community. These texts could just be random thoughts. It could be letting you be the first to know about an event I'm planning, maybe giving an update on a special I'm running or some free training that I host for my community. Anyway, just shoot me a text to get subscribed to the list. The number is 702-996 3926. Again, that is 702-996-3926. Let's get back to the podcast. So the Chris Voss that started at the bottom like everybody else, but was destined to become that pin on top of the pyramid. Where do you think that Chris Voss actually began? When did your story veer into the outlier?
Yeah, well, my father had expectations for everybody, all of his children to work hard and figure stuff out. And there was a lot of underlying stuff, honesty, integrity. My father was a ridiculously honest guy. And I think I always look to like maybe figure it out faster than other people or consistently get better and get smarter. I mean, there's a saying that I stumbled over not that long ago, never take advice from somebody you wouldn't trade places with. Yeah. Like who do you listen to? And then I look back on a couple of turning points in my career. Like when I became an FBI agent, I got referred to a seasoned FBI agent to ask about, what should I do to get ready? And he told me a couple of things that seemed innocuous to me, which I wasn't doing. Like one was, he said, what do you know about current events? And at the time, current events didn't help me become a better cop. Mm-hmm. The guys that were good cops, I wanted to know what they were studying. So I'm like, I'm not, current events doesn't really help me be a better cop. And he said, well, you come in to interview for us. We're going to want to know you're up to date on current events. So I started paying attention to current events, and lo and behold, the same guy was on my interview panel. If you listen to the right people, they're going to look to see whether or not you paid attention. Mm. And I had a ridiculously, almost embarrassingly high score from my initial interview panel. And I think that guy, when he saw that I was coachable, that I listened to him, then it was in his interest to rate me high. Now, the same token, if I'd have come in and they'd asked me about current events and I said, I don't know, it doesn't help me be a cop, so I don't pay attention to it. He probably would have slaughtered me on a panel. Mm-hmm. And I look back at those moments you mentioned before, the woman that got me on a hostage negotiation team in New York City. She gave me advice and I followed it. And she was shocked that I followed her advice. Maybe way back when my father was trying to teach me how to work, he was like, look, do it like this, or find out who knows how to do it and ask them. And I think that's really one of the big things. Are you teachable? Are you coachable? Are you willing to be smarter today than you were yesterday? Little things like that.
How long did you have to, would you say, not toil necessarily, but how long would you say you were doing work that was more grind than glory before you started to penetrate through into, a position of some renown or accolade?
Yeah. Wow. That's an interesting question, because one of the coaches on our team, Derek Gaunt, when he tells people he says, get 1 degree better every day, and then that 1 degree, like, when water goes from ice to water, it's been warming up for a while, but then suddenly there's a state change, or when water turns into steam, at 211 degrees, it's still water, and 212, bang, suddenly you're in the next level, and it's a whole different power dynamic. Yeah. So, I think I always grinded it out, but if you're relentless and you just do a little bit more every day, then suddenly, bang, you're in the next level. And and you don't really know when it happens. And I don't think it actually takes that long. I don't think there's that much to get it done, but it doesn't feel like a lot of progress every day. And then maybe 6 months later, you're at a whole new level. Yeah.
So I'm curious, what was that like in law enforcement? Was there a certain point where you realized, like, hey, I'm pulling ahead of this pack, and even though I'm not there yet, if I just keep the momentum and don't screw it up, I know I've got this in the bag?
Yeah, I think probably early in my FBI days, I'd kind of gone through that on a police department. And, I was only a cop for 3 years. And, I just worked at it every day. And
that was in New York City?
No, actually Kansas City, Missouri was where a police officer. Okay. I'd have a good month of stats, with just trying to do a good job every night. And then I accumulated, a few good months of stats. And actually, I interviewed for, I was still in the PD for the SWAT team. And, the commanders had been paying attention to my stats for a while, and I had no idea. And then suddenly I get commanders that are writing good evaluations for me. And, I don't know. I suppose probably I gained a sense for it after about having been at it for only about 2 or 3 years. And suddenly the guys that I considered my peers from 2 or 3 years ago just weren't getting anywhere at all. And I think at that point in time, I just started to see, the steady accumulation of staying after it. Yeah. And you don't really notice how many of them fall away each and every day. But when you turn back and look down the mountain, there are a lot of them that are a long way behind you.
So again, at what age would you say you noticed, hey, I'm getting these reviews, I seem to be on a course, maybe I'm about to make the leap to Quantico and on and on. At what age would you say you started to sense like I'm on a track to a non-traditional career, like not just another ordinary law enforcement career?
Yeah, I think it started when I applied for the FBI. I was actually pretty young. I was still. They hired me when I was 25, just before my 26th birthday, and I applied earlier that year. I mean, I had started to feel good about my ability to achieve goals when I applied for the FBI and the interview process. There's some really solid guys that interviewed me. Like they asked me, what have you any citations, any letters of recommendation, accomplishments? And I remember saying to him, well, I've gotten a couple of letters from some good things that I've done. And I just got one the other day. And at the same time, I could tell you I've done better work than what these letters, what I've gotten. Some of them are kind of embarrassed because I didn't think I did that great of a job. And I remember those guys saying to me, that's where you're going to find it's going to be in life. You're going to get accolades for stuff that you thought was okay. And there's going to be some stuff you did that you thought was spectacular. And nobody's going to care.
So you start to get this success and you start to create these opportunities for yourself. When did it cross over into true, like life or death? Like it's no longer about Chris looking good. It's about someone else staying alive. What was that first instance?
Yeah, it was probably at that Chase Manhattan Bank robbery. Chase Manhattan Bank in Brooklyn. And I had, it had been that long since I've been trained as a hostage negotiator. And it actually hadn't, the suicide hotline experience, which I was still volunteering on the hotline at that time to keep my skills sharp. Because negotiation is a perishable skill. Jim Camp wrote a book called Start With No. Jim used to say negotiation was a human performance event. And, Jim had been a football coach, among other things, and that's why I described it like that. But I'd studied, I kind of been prepping, like you come out of the negotiation training at Quantico and, you want to get out there and you want to get in the middle of something big. And, the crazy thing, after every class, somebody in the class falls into something inside of a week. Not everybody does. So when I got to the Chase Manhattan Bank, I mean, that was a real full-fledged bank robbery with hostages, which is really rare. But I was ready, I'd been working my process. I'd been practicing. I'd had all my small stakes practice. So when they handed me that phone, I was the second guy up to bat that day. I just, I knew that there were hostages inside that could die. But I just leaned into the process and I didn't feel the pressure.
Do you think that let's call it not feeling the pressure, or maybe it's the hunger for battle, even real battle with real bullets? Do you think that that's something that they can fully train into a person, or do you think there's a part of you that was just born ready for a high stakes engagement and able to handle it?
Yeah. Daniel Cole wrote a book called The Talent Code that says nobody's born with anything. Mm-hmm. Now, what happens along some along the lines that get you ready for it. Like I know, I had read in sports analogies in sports and law enforcement that the top performers in sports actually envisioned the scenario before it happened in order to perform. I think I've heard this referred to as visioning. So the first thing that I accepted that I had to envision was, if you're going to actually utilize deadly force, you've got to visualize what it actually takes for there to be a human being in your sights versus a paper target.
Mm-hmm.
And then I'd seen people fail in shooting situations where they should shoot. And one of them was a classmate of mine. And this person said to me, I just never thought I'd ever actually have to use my gun. And I remember saying, what did you think we were doing on the target range? And a lot of people just say, I'm just punching holes in a target. I'm never going to have to shoot at a person.
Mm-hmm.
Somebody might die if you don't embrace that. So I'd already gone through that. By the time I was a hostage negotiator, I knew that I had to have thought about the consequences in order to reconcile yourself to it. And I think that had a lot to do with it.
Was there any training that you went through that you feel like was critical to actually get you to that, to get you over that emotional resistance to deadly force if it came down to it?
Well, first of all, it was the acceptance of it to begin with. Different epiphany moments. When I was a police officer, I remember walking down the street one day and I was in plain clothes. I was off duty and a police car went by. And, you know, I saw a couple of people on the street. I saw one guy act like he was pointing a gun at the police officers and say, you know, I'd like to kill every one of them. And I remember thinking at that point in time, there are people that don't even know me that would kill me just because of what I was doing for a living. And, you know, different places along the lines. And then I read that article about performance under extremely stressful situations. And then probably one of the critical training was when I went through SWAT training. If you're going to embrace the training, they put you in all the different scenarios where not only is it a legally justifiable killing, it's morally justifiable. And those are not always the same thing. It can often be legally justifiable and not be, it might not be morally acceptable. But they wanted us to envision what it was like to go through each one of those. And they caught me off guard a couple times. A scenario where it might be legally and morally called for. And I hadn't envisioned that. So I think me being open to the training and being honest about it every step of the way, and then I picked it up at different points in time.
But I'm curious, what about as a negotiator? Was there ever a situation, maybe this is a hard question, but hey, I'm an interviewer. I'm supposed to ask hard questions, right?
Yeah, sure.
Was there ever a situation where you found yourself, or did you ever even allow yourself to ask the question, if I was in this terrorist or kidnapper or whatever the term was, if I was in their shoes, I can understand how they would have reached the point where they would be doing this. And I can't, even though my job is to be their adversary, I can't actually fault them for what they're doing. Did you ever?
Well, you got to understand it. The critical issue is, do you agree with it? You know, and that's a strength in any negotiation. The key to empathy for hostage negotiation and business negotiation. Can I understand where you're coming from and not agree? Or even can I understand and actually disagree? And so I can understand how, I don't know that, you know, I can't imagine a scenario where I couldn't understand how somebody got to some sort of immoral decision. Understanding the path of how they got there and agreeing is not the same thing, or even holding them accountable. Like when I went through the training at the negotiation at the FBI, the scenario that they hit us with on a second day was what really started the whole suicide by cop recognition of a phenomena that existed for a long time. It was in Rochester, New York, and a guy named William Griffith went to the bank to be killed by police. And it was when law enforcement had to recognize, if you got a suicide by cop scenario and a guy's got hostages, he's going to kill hostages till we kill him. And that wasn't really, and that's just the way it is. So, you know, we got no choice. He's going to keep killing. And William Griffith, murdered one of the hostages in front of law enforcement because law enforcement didn't want to kill him at the time. So they hit us with that second day of the negotiation training. And so really, I figured that the biggest regret that any other hostage negotiator would go through would be to fail to recognize this. And their failure to recognize it and then make a recommendation to command would cost innocent lives. So my focus as a hostage negotiator has probably contributed to the fact that I'd previously been on a SWAT team, was teaching negotiators from the very beginning. We got a 93% success rate. That means 7% of the time it's gonna go bad. And you're gonna have to, and you need to recognize that to minimize the unnecessary loss of life before it does.
So that's 1 out of every 14 cases. So by your 15th or 20th case, somebody's been killed, either a hostage or a kidnapper.
Yeah, well, that's what I thought. And then I preferred and you talked about the Abu Sayyaf in the Philippines. We had 2 straight cases with those guys. Second case turned into a train wreck where people got killed. And then that's the gut check moment for any hostage negotiator. Because, with the percentages we're talking about, if you do less than 10, everything you touch turns out and you think, I'm a great negotiator. Everything I touch, people live. I save lives. But by the numbers, once you climb over double digits, you're starting to get into the danger zone where the chances are something's going to go bad. Now, do you quit or do you get better? To quote the great Irish philosopher Colin McGregor, I win or I get better. Which means when you fail miserably, will you rebound or will you quit? Will you get smarter or will you give up? And I think that's also kind of in my nature. Are mistakes learning accelerators, or do they cause you to just quit?
So were there cases where you felt like the lessons learned from a situation where life was lost, you were able to directly apply in the future such that lives were saved and kind of
without question
rebalance the debt, so to speak?
Without question. What we ended up learning, how we ended up getting better as a result of the Burnham-Sabero case, not only saved lives on down the line, but it got people out sooner, which was, since most of the hostages are going to live, your real job is to use empathy to shorten the timeline of the deal. There was a company that I gave a keynote speech to fairly recently, and one of their internal sayings was, relationships are the only thing that affect deal timelines. And I thought, yeah, I applied that in hostage negotiation. Empathy is the only thing that's going to affect the deal timeline. Can you apply empathy and accelerate the timeline? Or is your lack of it going to lengthen the timeline? And we found that, in hostage negotiation and in turnaround look in real life, business deals, empathy accelerates relationships and it accelerates timelines.
You're the one who I think is the least Navy SEAL-ish about yourself, so to speak.
Oh, totally. And my public appearance is the least, right? Like when it comes to SEAL, is very lack of connected. And arguably, I believe that the work that I've done post SEALs is much more important than the work that I did as a SEAL, because part of people often ask, what's the difference between, the content that we have and Jocko's content? Well, big difference is, what I'm putting out is based on the 13 years of entrepreneurship after the SEALs, not the 10 years in the SEALs. All of their content is based on the time they spend in the SEALs, now applying it to entrepreneurship. It's a very different direction to go at.
Where is it that it does not map over? Like, what would you say are some integral principles in the SEAL teams that actually don't translate to business? Nobody ever talks about that.
Yeah. So I don't know, this might be,
other than if you don't agree with somebody, you can kill them. I think that does.
yeah, you can use high explosives to solve any problem you have. Right. I don't know how this will be taken in for the bigger audience, but like I have a very strong opinion on this. There is a reliance on individual performance that allows the SEALs to work the way they do. So if you look at a lot of the content that you're going to get from Goggins or Jocko and Leif, there is a reliance on the individual to perform at a certain level for it to work, right? Think of it, extreme individual ownership, responsibility. Like that's
so it's like, so you're saying it's a team that's predicated on having a bunch of individual superstars that are also willing to subordinate their individual superstardom.
You got
but it's still a prerequisite.
Just, I am a hard ass. Like I can do anything. You can be like me if you just work really, really, really hard and suffer really, really good. So that all works, right? It does. And arguably what I love, like a distinction I make between Jocko and Leif stuff and ours is they're really talking about individual leadership, right? They're teaching you how to individually become a better leader. Very needed, right? Mm-hmm. Awesome stuff. Within that becomes a need for individual self-regulation, responsibility, discipline. David, same thing, right? That's the message. It's individual leadership. Where we focus on is the structures necessary for a team to coordinate well. And if you rely on individual leadership, individual discipline, individual performance to leverage or produce a high functioning team, it won't work, right? You're limited because that's the biggest argument. Go do extreme ownership and then try and put it into a company where people are mediocre to poor performers. It won't work.
Which is, and I'm curious to the extent to which you agree with this, but like, you know, and I say this respectfully, knowing some of my own employees will hear this, but like in most companies, most employees are not exceptional.
They can't be, or they would be in your position.
Yeah, they'd be the exception, which means they couldn't be the norm. Yeah. Okay.
Right. And so that is why I love it is it's not only the gap, but it's the answer to the gap. Right. So we need what they're saying and doing because we need to up level individual performance and individual leadership. We also need to know how teams function and to coordinate action on teams that are not necessarily high functioning individuals. Because that's the reality in which all of us that are not in the SEALs are going to operate in. Mm-hmm. Right. So we need both. That's why I in no way, shape or form am putting down what they're saying, but I'm saying there is a gap in ultimate high performance because you can't have everyone be amazing. You can't hire everyone to be amazing or else you're spending way too much money and your pool of this people is too limited. And so it's like a 1-2 punch. Right. And you can do like, I can start with a jab cross or I can do cross jab. Like you can go either way.
Right.
You can up level individual leadership and then work on now coordinating action as a team, or you can up level how you coordinate action, which provides space to increase individual leadership. Right. If I was to say which way to go, like I would always go with coordination of action first, individual leadership second, based on the fact that we're going to get more early wins by getting teams functioning better at the individual level they're at. And then once we have that space, now let's make everyone better.
When Larry Yatch had me, so to speak, like, okay, I was like, okay, I'm going to go talk to this guy. I want this guy in my world. Was when you basically made the statement and then built the logical proof that the growth of any organization will ultimately become capped at the trauma of its leader.
The growth of a structurally sound organization. And that's a key piece.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right? If you do not have a structurally sound, if you don't have an offer, you don't have all the parts of the business, all that stuff, your growth is limited by that. Right.
Right.
For sure. But once you have a structurally sound organization, and this doesn't have to be big, right? This can be one person with, marketing, sales, fulfillment, support. We got all 4 of those parts and they're working at some level. So don't hear organization and rule yourself out because you're one or two person company. It doesn't matter. So if you have a structurally sound company, meaning you got all the parts of a company, you have an offer, therefore you have an offer that's working.
So like, I mean, just to contextualize this, you could be like a 1 person, 1 chair barber with a barbershop.
100%. Right. So how do I assess this structural sound? 4 parts: marketing, sales, fulfillment, and support. So marketing is from someone gaining interest to when they ask you for something, then it goes into sales. From asking for it to giving you $1 of sales. Once they give you a $1 bill, you've made a promise. Fulfillment's fulfilling on the promise you made them for the $1. And support are all the things that aren't getting a client or servicing that client that you have to do your job. Right. So being a solo barber in a barber seat has to attract attention, get someone to ask for a haircut, promise them that they're going to give them a haircut, collect $1 for it, and then give them the haircut, and then clean up, make sure they've got scissors and clean up the hair after, right? Like, it doesn't matter. Those 4 things are important. So 1 person can do that or multiple people. Mm-hmm. I'd love to can I take a sidetrack from this? Because I think you'll find this to be very, very interesting. And this, I guess, would be one of the biggest insights that I've made in the last 2 or 3 years about the structural integrity of an organization. Like this can be a game changer. So when assessing the structural stability or soundness of an organization, the first thing we're looking at are those 4 parts. Like, do they exist? And then the next thing is, at what level are we acting or fulfilling each of those 4 parts, right? Some organizations really strong on marketing, not good at sales, or really good at marketing and sales, not so good at fulfillment, or those might be all good and support's not good. So what we found, and this to be really interesting, is when you look at those 4 parts of your business, it isn't the level to which you're performing in those. It's the relative level. Yeah. When one of those is higher or lower than the others, we have problems. Is that the delta? Isn't that the technical term? Like, if I'm at 3 on marketing, 3 on sales, 3 on fulfillment, 3 on support, I'm actually doing okay. If I'm at 7, 8 on marketing, 9 on sales, 2 on fulfillment, 9 on support, I'm in trouble. And so that was a huge game changer of, wow, I'm not just trying to increase my performance on every level. I'm trying to normalize or equalize my performance and then strategically grow them as opposed to just being really good at marketing. Going back to the original thing, in a structurally sound organization, the unresolved traumas of the CEO or the head of it is the biggest limitation to growth. That's the statement that I made. And where that usually triggers people is that the vast majority of people that I say that to immediately have the same response as I imagine most of the people on this that are listening. Well, I haven't experienced any trauma. Yeah. Right. And therein lies the trap. Right. The biggest trap I think that we've created for ourselves is the connection of trauma to big life event.
Well, yeah, we've as a culture, we've almost celebritized trauma. Yeah. There's your celebrity traumas. There's your rape. There's your child molestation. There's a family member was murdered in front of me in a, tribal war. And you know what I mean? We've created these big 5 traumas. Yeah. And if you haven't experienced one of those, then you haven't experienced trauma. You're a trauma poser, basically. Yeah. Yeah. Now, where I went in a different door for that is what is the common thread between war, rape, loss of a loved one, massive accident, where you're injured? What is the common thread between what are very different things?
And the common thread that I found is a perceived loss of control, right? And that then opens everything up, right? War and rape are the same in that in war, it's only traumatizing when I perceive that I don't control the outcome, right?
And is that relative? Meaning there are greater or lesser perceived losses of control that correlate to greater or lesser traumas?
Right. So if you were to take the rate of a drafted Army infantry soldier in Vietnam, right? So take that group of people, and you take the Navy SEALs that went to Vietnam. If you looked at the average exposure to danger, conflict, war, fights, all that stuff, the SEALs much higher, right? They were just in horrible stuff all the time.
Right.
Some Army guys, yes, but overall, right, it's a lower level. If you look at the rate of post-traumatic stress from a drafted infantry guy versus a Navy SEAL.
Key term drafted, meaning did not sign up for it voluntarily.
Drafted versus a Navy SEAL, the instances and depth of the post-traumatic stress would be not even comparable. Right. On the Army side, massive. On the SEAL side, very, very small. How could that be? It is an exposure to risk that caused the trauma. It is the perception of control within that risk that causes the trauma. Right. So a drafted guy, as soon as he's drafted, he is now fertile ground for trauma. He doesn't even want to be in the Army.
Well, he's already traumatized just because he got drafted.
Exactly. Right. Yeah. So he doesn't want to be in the Army. Then they put him through minimal training. So he's got no real perception of skill or control ability to influence his outcome. They give him no information on what he's doing, where he's going, what missions he's on. He's just go stand here and point your gun in that direction. Right. That is absolute perception and no control of the outcome. Navy SEAL had to fight through the hardest training process in the world just to become a SEAL, then would actually argue with each other as to who gets to go to war. And then in that has 3 years of training in doing it with a group of guys that he trusts his life with more than ever, and then anyone, anywhere, and then is part of the planning process for all the missions that goes on, right? Perception and control is up here.
Yeah.
So it's perception and control that causes trauma, not exposure to what would be a traumatic environment. And that all goes back to us being cave people. As a cave person, every time I was exposed to an environment where I didn't control something, if the weather changed, I die. If the deer go to the other field, I die. If I get a scratch on a branch, I die. So as a cave person for 200,000 years, we're conditioned to know if we don't control something, we're going to die. That's why you can take someone that is scared of public speaking, put them in front of 10 people, and they will act physiologically and neurochemically as if they're going to die when there's absolutely no risk, all based on perceived lack of control.
Okay. So that's how we sort of define trauma.
Right.
Talk about then, again, and maybe tailor it. I mean, speak your truth and your observations, but to the extent possible, tailor it to, let's assume the avatar of the audience is, I'm in the early stage of starting a business. Like maybe I have 5 people, not 500 people, right? But then talk about how that trauma maps over to the limitations of an organization or a team.
Well, first off, I want to underline the point. Everyone that's listening to this show has experienced trauma, even if you've never been to war, been raped, had a massive accident, injury, life event. That's the first important thing. Every single one of us has lived in a world where we had a perception that we didn't control outcome, especially as a child.
Yeah, I remember you talking to me in one of our conversations about the different things that, like you said, physiologically mirror war or attack, more violent physical trauma. Like as a kid, like you were like, another kid calls you stupid, and like physiologically you respond exactly the same way you would if a guy pointed a gun at your face.
It makes no difference. And as a child, because we know that we can't survive without our parents, without those around us, it doesn't take much for us to feel like our life is at risk if we get any sort of isolation, right? Any sort of isolation, any sort of disconnection from those we care of. Parents that either are bad parents or just made the wrong choice, it doesn't make a difference, right? One of the examples, the seed trauma, the core trauma for this guy that he had to deal with for the rest of his life, caused himself all sort of trouble, was when he was about 3.5, 4. He remembers having a massive outburst. Like he's just yelling and crying like a tantrum. And his parents put him in his room for about 15 minutes and then came in and talked to him. Like that's what good parents do. For a 3-year-old, they have no perception of time. Time doesn't exist yet. You take a 3-year-old in already a triggered state, put them in a room by themselves. That child now believes can go down the road of they are going to die because they've been isolated from their caregivers. And a child that is isolated from their caregivers at 3 years old doesn't have any concept they're going to come back.
Yeah.
So think about that. This poor guy's seed trauma was something that his parents did that was right. Like it was a good behavior.
Right.
You'd call that good parenting. So my point in bringing that up is not to have you worry that, holy crap, I'm traumatizing my kids. Yes, you are. It's okay. What I'm bringing that up is all it takes is a perception when you're pre-logical at 3 years old that you don't control something and you now have experienced trauma.
So basically trauma is in the eye of the beholder to a large degree.
Yes. And it is the mechanism through which adults develop, right? So we have all been traumatized. That is an important point because everything I say from now on out depends on the listener actually saying like, he's talking to me. Because that's what I have to get over the most, especially entrepreneurs, because they're masters of their world, right? Or we wouldn't be an entrepreneur. So they're always like, well, I've never had trauma. Mm-hmm. I'm not talking to you. Yes, I'm talking to you. You have experienced trauma. All these things line up. The mechanism for problem is understanding that trauma is merely a lesson, right? We mix traumatic experience, traumatic environment, and trauma into one thing.
Traumatic experience, traumatic environment, and trauma itself.
Those are the three very different things, right?
Ooh,
so
that sounds deep. Can you, unpack that?
So traumatic experience is any environment where I have a perception I don't control the outcome. The more perceived consequence, the deeper the trauma. So not all traumas are equal, right? If I have a perception that I have no control and there's massive consequence to not having control, big trauma.
Okay.
If I have a perception that I don't have a lot of control, but there's little consequence, little trauma. But either way, trauma is developed. So trauma is the experience. Like when I perceive I don't have control and there's consequence. The environment is the environment in which that experience happened. If in my traumatic experience, I die because I had no control, I don't experience trauma. Right? That's an important piece, right? I only experience trauma if I survive.
Okay.
So trauma is the lesson that I learned in surviving the traumatic experience.
Okay.
Now, trauma is good when that lesson serves us. It always serves us in the same environment. So when I was in war and I experienced trauma, I learned lessons in war that serve me in war. When I am no longer in war and I'm using the same lessons, I create stress in my life. That's post-traumatic stress.
So post-traumatic stress is to some degree the legitimate application of lessons learned only in the wrong environment.
You nailed it. Right. So for example, in war, I learned that everything could go to shit at any point in time. Like that was true. I didn't make that up. Planes crashed, helicopters caught fire.
And in fact, that belief probably kept you safe and had you planning appropriately.
On top of it, I learned that if something went to crap, people I cared about and loved were going to get hurt. And because I was an officer, I knew that if they got hurt, it was my fault. So I lived in the truth that everything was going to go to crap, that everyone I cared about was going to get hurt, and it was all my fault. that made me an excellent SEAL in a wartime environment. Right. Excellent. Served me. That was true. And it worked well. Starting a business in which I know everything's going to go to crap. Everyone I'm responsible for is going to suffer, and it's all my fault, made for a miserable life of suffering and a limited business because it is no longer the same environment. So I created stress by being hyper vigilant in an environment that didn't dictate it. Our traumas create a truth in that environment. As soon as we apply those truths in a new environment, they become untrue.
Right.
When we act in untruth, we create stress in our life. And I believe that, how whatever your belief set is of universe, higher power, consciousness, God, source, whatever you want to say, I believe suffering and stress in our life is a gift from that which is greater than us, pointing us in the right direction. Right. So I believe that every time that I am experiencing suffering, I am living in some untruth. And that's a gift from God to point me in a direction of where I no longer have that suffering, which all of a sudden takes me out of being a victim to anything. So in those untruths, we have to find truth, right? What is true in this environment?
If you loved that episode, then you're definitely going to love this one. Check it out.
Trauma is relative. The statistics say that 90% of people have gone through significant trauma in life. Guess what? I'd like to meet the 10% that haven't. Welcome to Earth, place of trauma. Why? Because without trauma, there's no growth.